I am sitting here witnessing something unfold in real time fast. Not gradually, but at a pace where you blink and suddenly the map looks different. What I'm about to share with you over the next few minutes isn't a theory or a speculation. It's a documented, sourced, and cross-verified collapse of military and diplomatic strategy. The people behind it do not want you to connect the dots, but that's exactly what we're going to do. Stay with me, because once you see the full picture, you cannot unsee it. If you're new here, welcome to Sarah Mitchell's YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the situation we're covering today is evolving by the hour, and you need to be the first to know when the next development breaks. Let's dive in. Let's rewind 72 hours. Something extraordinary occurred across American and Israeli media simultaneously. Major outlets like Fox News, Axios, and N12 in Israel reported the same story, with multiple sourced confirmations. The headline was striking: thousands of Iraqi Kurds had launched a ground offensive inside Iran. This was the narrative presented by American officials to Fox, confirmed by Israeli officials to N12, and echoed by sources relayed to Barak Ravid at Axios, one of the most well-connected reporters covering the Middle East. Jennifer Griffin reported it as well, and here's the thing about her: she's not a reckless journalist. After decades in this field, she almost always gets her sourcing right. When Jennifer Griffin reports something, newsrooms take it seriously. She wasn't guessing. She was told this by people with official titles and access, and it turned out to be 100% false. Stop and read that again. 100% false. Not partially wrong, not a mischaracterization, not a nuance issue, completely documentably, verifiably false. Within hours, the denial came not from Iran or some anonymous countersource, but from Aziz Ahmad, the deputy chief of staff for the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq, who stated unequivocally, "Not a single Iraqi Kurd has crossed the border into Iran." Following that, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, KDP, the leading political party in the Kurdistan region, issued a formal statement reaffirming that the Kurds would not be involved in any conflicts and would continue to support diplomatic efforts. Let's clarify what happened here. The United States government, or individuals acting in its name, disseminated a false story about a ground invasion to multiple major media outlets at the same time. The story was specific enough to name a population and a region, detailed enough that experienced journalists reported it without question, and it was a lie. Why does this matter? Why is a fabricated story about a military offensive such a critical data point in understanding the current situation? Because this was not just a case of bad intelligence or a fog of war miscommunication. When you deliberately plant a story in Fox, Axios, and N12 simultaneously, all citing official American and Israeli sources, it constitutes a coordinated information operation with an agenda. Understanding that purpose reveals the desperation underlying the entire war strategy. Here's what the data points indicate when you line them up. The Trump administration entered this conflict with a specific theory: bomb Iran's nuclear facilities and military infrastructure, and in the ensuing chaos, the Iranian people would rise up. Internal pressure would compound external pressure, leading to the regime's collapse or capitulation. They expected it to be fast and clean a win. However, that theory is failing. Yes, there were significant protests in Iran last month, but the regime did not fall. When protesters needed a signal that the outside world supported them, that signal did not come with the force they required to protect them. Consequently, according to multiple reports from human rights organizations and regional journalists, tens of thousands of Iranians have been killed in the crackdown. Estimates range from 30,000 to 40,000, with some numbers even higher. The strategic failure becomes even more damaging when you consider that while this was happening, the Trump administration was reportedly signaling openness to a transition figure from within the Islamic Republic itself. Not a democratic opposition figure or a reformist, but someone from the existing clerical structure. For an Iranian citizen watching this unfold, what are they supposed to think? Why would they risk their lives for an uprising if the Americans intend to hand power to someone from the same system? As a result, the people did not rise. The regime is battered but still standing, and the United States is depleting precision munitions at an alarming rate, prompting concern within the Pentagon. According to multiple reports, the Pentagon may soon have to make triage decisions about which incoming threats to intercept, days away from that point, not weeks. This context is essential for understanding the Kurdish story. If an internal uprising cannot be generated, the US needs boots on the ground from elsewhere. The Kurds, specifically the Iranian Kurdish militias and networks inside Iraqi Kurdistan, represent the most logical candidates. They have fighters, motivation, and knowledge of the terrain in northwestern Iran. Based on what we now know, the working theory suggests that the United States and Israel attempted to pressure Kurdish forces into launching a ground offensive. When the Kurds refused, the US and Israel leaked a false story claiming that the invasion was already underway, betting that the public claim might pressure the Kurds or provoke Iran to move forces to the northwestern border in response to the fabricated report, which could then be targeted by airstrikes. That was the plan, and it failed. The Kurds immediately called it out. The KDP statement was not diplomatically ambiguous. It was a direct public rejection. By pushing the story and attaching Kurdish names to a military action that never occurred, the United States has now made those Kurdish communities potential targets for reprisals from Shia militias aligned with Tehran. Let's talk about betrayal. The Trump administration betrayed the Kurds in Syria during its first term by withdrawing US forces and allowing Turkish military operations against Kurdish communities that had fought alongside Americans against ISIS. This happened again in Syria more recently when the administration chose not to protect Kurdish autonomous zones in northern Syria. And now this, using the Kurdish name in a fabricated military story, putting a target on people who said no. This is not strategy. This is desperation masquerading as strategy. If you haven't subscribed to Sarah Mitchell's YouTube channel yet, do so now. We're providing daily updates on this conflict, and the pace is not slowing down. Now, let's discuss what is happening on the ground. While the information war plays out in press conferences and leaked stories, the actual war is expanding at an unexpected pace. The scale of the bombing campaign against Iran has been described by multiple military analysts as 2 to 3 times the intensity of the shock and awe campaign from 2003 in Iraq, which was unprecedented in modern warfare. This is no longer a surgical strike operation. It has escalated to sustained strategic bombardment. Iran is responding aggressively. Iranian strikes have now hit targets in Cyprus, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Bahrain, Oman, Turkey, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. This is not a localized conflict. It is a regional war. Let's pause on Turkey for a moment. Turkey is a NATO member, and Article 5 of the NATO treaty states that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all members. Iran has struck Turkish territory. The question that isn't receiving enough attention right now is whether Article 5 will be formally invoked. If it is, what implications would that have for every NATO country, including the United States, which is already at war? NATO interceptors reportedly prevented the Iranian strike on Turkey from causing significant damage, but the strike occurred and the targeting happened. The alliance treaty framework is now in play in ways that were not anticipated when this operation began. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan, which shares a border with Iran, has placed its troops on combat alert and deployed them to the frontier. According to the independent media outlet Gazeti, citing military sources, Azerbaijan is not a NATO member, but it is a significant regional player with close ties to both Turkey and Israel. Its military posture is important. Then there's Ukraine. Here's a sentence I want you to consider carefully. The United States is now reaching out to Ukraine for help in combating Iran. Ukraine, a country that the Trump administration spent months undermining, withholding weapons from, taunting publicly and pressuring toward concessions, this very Ukraine. The Trump administration has now approached President Zelensky, asking for assistance specifically regarding drone interception and countermeasures against Iranian-made Shahid drones and ballistic missiles. Ukraine has been fighting those exact weapons, as Russia has been using Iranian drones and missiles against Ukrainian cities since 2022. The Ukrainians have developed some of the most advanced real-time countermeasure systems in the world against those specific threats. Zelensky confirmed this outreach in a public statement, saying, "The American side has reached out to us for help about what they can do." Think about the implications of this. The United States, with the largest defense budget in history, with 17 intelligence agencies and hundreds of billions of dollars in advanced military hardware, is turning to a country it has actively undermined for help against weapons it helped Iran develop distribution networks for by failing to stop Russian procurement operations. This is not a 15 out of 10. This is not a smashing success. This is the compounding consequence of strategic decisions made without a coherent plan. Now, let's discuss what has been said publicly, as the public communication itself is a crisis. In a press conference this week, when asked to rate the war effort on a scale of 1 to 10, the response was a staggering 15. No caveats, no acknowledgement of the munitions shortage, the regional escalation, the failed Kurdish operation, the diplomatic isolation in Europe, or the thousands of civilians killed, just 15 out of 10. For context, during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic, a similar scale was invoked, with an 11 out of 10 rating. That pandemic went on to kill over 1 million Americans. The justification for the war has also shifted publicly within the same week. Initially, it was about Iranian nuclear weapons, with claims that without the bombing campaign, Iran would have developed a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks. That assertion is unsupported by any independent arms control experts or officials from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. The IAEA's most recent assessments prior to the conflict did not corroborate a 2-week timeline for weapons development. Then the justification switched to Israel, with a direct statement on camera, "We did it for Israel." This represents two different justifications, one centered on American national security, the other on protecting an ally. They're not the same argument, and when you shift between them in the same news cycle, it raises a fundamental question: which one is true? If neither has been clearly established as valid, what exactly was the legal and strategic basis for launching what has now escalated into a regional war? During a White House press briefing, the press secretary was asked directly about a reported U.S. airstrike on an elementary school that allegedly killed 175 people. Multiple outlets reported that intelligence supported the civilian casualty claims. The response from the podium was, "Not that we know of." An investigation is underway. The United States does not target civilians. While it's fair to allow investigations to proceed, "not that we know of" is not a denial. It's a deflection. Moreover, the statement, "the United States does not target civilians," is a policy declaration, not a factual statement regarding an incident currently under investigation. This distinction is crucial because the international legitimacy of this operation, already under scrutiny, partly hinges on how the United States responds to credible allegations of civilian casualties. A dismissal wrapped in a policy statement does not address the allegations. It changes the subject. Additionally, during that same briefing, there was a claim that Spain, which had publicly refused to allow its military bases to be used for U.S. operations in the conflict, had reversed course and agreed to cooperate. The Spanish government immediately issued a denial, stating, "No, we are not cooperating militarily with the United States in this conflict." This denial was direct and public. Two governments, two contradictory statements, one of them is lying. Given the documented record of false statements we've already discussed in this video, the Kurdish ground invasion, the 2-week nuclear timeline, and the school strike deflection, the pattern of credibility points in one direction. Now, let's consider what this means for individuals on the ground, not for governments or stock markets, but for people. If you are an American citizen in the Middle East right now, whether a business person, student, contractor, or aid worker, the State Department hotline you were instructed to call is playing a recorded message. This message states, "Do not rely on the U.S. government for assisted departure or evacuation at this time." Former ambassadors from both Democratic and Republican administrations have gone on record, some publicly and some to journalists, saying they have never witnessed a situation where the United States went to war without an evacuation plan for its own citizens. Not in their careers, not in any conflict they can remember. The message from the State Department to American civilians in the region is clear. You are on your own. Good luck. Former diplomats are describing this as the worst breakdown in consular preparedness they have ever seen. Countries that usually have standard emergency protocols in place, such as Portugal, Canada, and France, are now scrambling to extend their evacuation assistance to cover American citizens whose own government has stated there is no plan for their evacuation. Meanwhile, Congress is being asked for an emergency supplemental appropriations package to secure additional defense funding because the situation regarding munitions is genuinely critical. The precision weapon stockpile is being depleted faster than the supply chain can replenish it. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It has become a logistical constraint on the operational tempo of the war. Zelensky knows it. Tehran knows it. And the Kurds, who were just misrepresented publicly, definitely know it. There are also financial signals worth monitoring. The Dow crossing 50,000 was mentioned during the same press conference, where discussions of a war with regional spillover, a munition shortage, and a diplomatic isolation crisis were all unfolding. The implication was clear. Look at the market. Everything is fine. However, market indexes and military operational capacity are not interchangeable measures. They never have been. A rising Dow did not indicate that the pandemic was under control in 2020, and a rising Dow in 2025 does not mean that a war consuming precision munitions faster than they can be restocked is going well. Oil markets have been more honest. Regional volatility in the Gulf, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz, which accounts for roughly 20% of global oil supply, has created the kind of energy price uncertainty that impacts everything downstream. Shipping insurance rates in the region have spiked, and defense contractor stocks have fluctuated significantly. However, the broader consumer-facing economic picture, fuel prices, heating costs, and supply chain pressure points, is not something a stock index captures in real time. Keep an eye on oil prices and shipping futures. Those indicators reveal truths that the Dow does not. Let's pause here. If this breakdown is making sense to you, if you feel like you're finally grasping a clear picture of what's actually happening, hit like and drop a comment. Tell me if you saw any of this coming. I read every comment, every single one. Your insights, especially from people who live in the region, work in defense, or follow financial signals, sharpen this channel's analysis. Now, let me outline the two scenarios I see unfolding from this point. Not 3, not 5, 2. The first path requires something very specific, the opening of a back channel. Not a public negotiation or a televised summit, but a quiet, credible third-party mediated communication between Washington and Tehran, possibly through Oman, which has historically played this role. In this scenario, a face-saving off-ramp is constructed for both sides. Iran halts its regional strikes while the U.S. pauses its bombing campaign, initiating a diplomatic process around nuclear verification and sanctions. For this to work, several conditions must be met simultaneously. Iran needs to determine that the cost of continuing the conflict outweighs the political cost of a negotiated pause. The U.S. must be willing to acknowledge that the stated objectives of the campaign have not been fully achieved, and both sides need to trust a mediator enough to take the first step into the unknown. Is this possible? Yes. Has it happened before in Middle Eastern conflicts that seemed hopeless? Yes. Iran and the U.S. have communicated through back channels during periods of maximum tension since 1979. However, what complicates this situation is that the credibility of the information coming from Washington has been severely damaged by the Kurdish story, the Spain claim, and the deflection regarding the elementary school strike. Iran's leadership may not trust any signal it receives as genuine. When you fabricate a story about a ground invasion and disseminate it to major media outlets, you don't just deceive the public. You undermine your own negotiating credibility with the adversary who is reading those same reports. The second path is the one I believe we are closer to right now. In this scenario, Iran continues its regional strike campaign, maintaining high costs for every U.S. ally in the region. Turkey formally invokes Article 5 or requests NATO consultation. NATO becomes involved, and European members, already furious about the Spain fabrication and distancing themselves from the operation, face a choice between their treaty obligations and political resistance to a war they did not sanction. The munitions gap becomes operationally binding, forcing the U.S. to choose which targets to intercept. Some threats get through, resulting in a significant strike against a major asset, whether that be a ship, a base, or a populated area, leading to escalation. Throughout all of this, the Kurds remain uninvolved. The Iranian people, having witnessed the crackdown on protesters last month and skeptical of what any American-backed transition might mean for them, do not rise in the numbers necessary to alter the regime's internal calculus. This scenario is not a prediction. It is built from the data points currently visible. Just 3 days ago, I thought we were closer to the first path, but then the Kurdish story broke, followed by the Spain lie, and the reports on munitions shortages made the distance to the first path seem longer. Let me be direct about something. The attempted manipulation of the Kurdish name for a military action that never happened is one of the most revealing moments of this entire conflict. It is revealing not because it failed, but because it highlights the level of strategic coherence, or lack thereof, behind this campaign. When you are winning, you do not need to fabricate ground invasions. When your theory of the campaign is effective, when the people are rising, when the regime is crumbling and your allies are aligned, you don't plant false stories in Fox, Axios, and N12 in hopes that public pressure will create a new reality. You resort to such tactics when your plan has faltered, when the tools you expected to use are unavailable, when the population you were counting on to rise has not done so, and when regional actors you anticipated cooperating have said no. This is what desperation looks like, dressed in an expensive suit and speaking into a microphone. The Kurdistan Democratic Party made their position clear. They will not participate in any conflicts. They support diplomatic efforts and aim to be a factor of calm. This statement comes from a political organization that has witnessed the United States abandon them multiple times, first in Trump's initial term, then in Syria. And now they see their name dragged into a fabricated war story that could make their communities targets for reprisals from Shia militias. They have experienced this before and recognize the pattern. They know what it looks like when Washington starts making promises it cannot fulfill and demands things it has no right to ask for. Now, having lied about them, having put them at risk, and having attempted to coerce them into a ground war they refused, the United States will eventually need something from them again, as every other option becomes increasingly costly. That is not a relationship. It is a pattern of exploitation. The Kurds, having faced this repeatedly, are not willing to play along. There's a larger question underlying all of this that no one in official Washington is addressing publicly. What does success look like now? Not in the framing of a press conference, not in the language of "we're doing a 15" in operational terms. What is the defined end state? Is it the destruction of Iran's nuclear capability? Reports suggest significant damage has been inflicted on known facilities, but Iran has had decades to disperse, harden, and build redundancy into its program. Physically destroying above-ground facilities does not guarantee the elimination of the knowledge, personnel, or underground infrastructure. Is it regime change? The population did not rise, the army has not fractured, and the clerical establishment, while under pressure, has not splintered in a way that would lead to the kind of internal collapse necessary to change governments. Is it deterrence? A demonstration of American military power sufficient to prevent Iran from becoming a regional hegemon? Perhaps, but a deterrence argument requires the deterred party to change its behavior. Iran is currently engaging in strikes across 9 countries in the region, which is the opposite of deterred behavior. The absence of a clear, defined, publicly articulated end state is not merely a communications problem, it is a strategic problem. Strategy problems at the level of a regional war have consequences that compound every day. They go unanswered. European governments are not seeking reassurance right now, they're asking for a plan. Germany, France, Italy, none of them sanctioned this operation, and none were consulted in any meaningful way before it began. They are now observing the conflict's impact expand toward their own security obligations as NATO members. The plan, it seems, is that there is no plan. Good luck. Former ambassadors and career diplomats who have served under presidents from both parties, who have managed evacuations in Lebanon, Libya, and Afghanistan, are publicly stating that they have never seen anything like this. It's not the conflict itself that's unprecedented, it's the absence of evacuation infrastructure, the lack of consular preparedness, and the failure to provide basic duty of care for citizens before a government makes a decision that puts its own people in harm's way. This is Sarah Mitchell's YouTube channel, and we will continue to cover this story with the detail and sourcing it deserves because it matters, not just geopolitically and strategically, but for the people involved. For the Kurds who were misrepresented, for the Iranians who have been killed, for the Americans who are stranded, and for the Ukrainians who are being asked to assist a government that abandoned them. If you're not already subscribed, do so now. Turn on notifications. We're updating daily, sometimes multiple times a day, because the situation demands it. Let me leave you with the questions that I think matter most right now. First, was the Kurdish story a failed pressure operation, a failed deception against Iran, or something else entirely? Who specifically authorized the planting of that story in American and Israeli media simultaneously? Second, if the munition supply is genuinely days away from a triage decision point, how will that affect the operational options available to military commanders? Does Congress know the full picture before voting on the supplemental appropriations package? Third, with Article 5 potentially in play after the Turkish strike, at what point does this stop being a bilateral US-Iran conflict and become something that formally involves all 32 NATO member states? Have any of those governments been genuinely consulted? And the overarching question, when the dust settles, and it will settle eventually, which decisions made in the last 3 weeks will history identify as turning points, and who will have been on the right side of those decisions? I want to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. What are you seeing from where you are? What data points am I missing? Hit subscribe, hit like, and come back tomorrow because this situation is not slowing down. This is Sarah Mitchell's YouTube channel, and we will keep going.